A judge in ancient Israel, a woman, a prophet who communicates God's will and words, a charismatic, religious, and undisputed political leader, a military advisor who is behind the general's strategic plans against powerful enemies. Really, a woman? Yes, a great woman she was, one among the 18 judges that at that time ruled over Israel. Her name is Deborah. Quote, the text explains the meaning of the name. She who would sit under the palm tree between Ramah and Bethel in the mountains of Ephraim. Her dramatic life story is to be found in the book of Judges, and it is being read on the Sabbath when its Haftarah or prophetic portion is devoted to her song, for she was also a talented and inspired poetess. Her victory poem ranks among the most poignant in our sacred texts. It may also be read as a historical document about Israel's situation at that time, who the enemy was, what his strength was, which tribe went to war to fight him, and which chose to stay behind, neutral. Naturally, men also took part, and of course a major part, in the fighting. But she, Deborah, and another woman of whom we shall speak about later, played a crucial role in the outcome of the battle. In fact, some sources attributed to her Israel's stunning military triumph. Mind you, she is not the only great and renowned feminine figure in biblical and Talmudic history. Following the matriarchs were Moses' sister, Miriam, who galvanized and mobilized women. In fact, she was the first woman, maybe before Lysistrata, who actually organized women into an extraordinary feminine movement. But Deborah alone was appointed by God to be his messenger and spokesperson. She knew what to do and when to do it and with whom. Now, in truth, the position of women in the Bible is not always very flattering. The fact is that when God tells Eve that he, the husband, Yimshol Bach, he shall rule over you, my God, really, why did he do that? So naturally, feminists among us could resent this first gender discrimination as old as the human species. Still, I try to justify everything possible in biblical sources, so I may offer a different interpretation to this particular sentence. The verb yimshol, which means he will rule, is rooted maybe in the word mashal, which means parable. And so the verse could very well read, and he, your husband, will serve you as a parable, a story. And why not? Much later, and this is more difficult to explain, much later in Mabidbar, the desert, Parshat Nassau, the problem becomes more serious. There, scripture deals with marital relations. What happens if and when a husband becomes jealous of his wife? She is brought before the high priest, who imposes on her a series of humiliating procedures, including the forced drinking of what we call the bitter waters. If she fails, well, don't ask. But what if she doesn't? Of course, she remains her husband's wife. But what about him? Doesn't he have at least to apologize to her? No. To push the case to its limits, the husband could easily repeat the scene once, twice, or 5 times, never risking any reproach from the high priest or anyone else. And furthermore, another question, and what if the wife becomes jealous of the husband? Nothing happens. Well, I'm a husband, but nevertheless I feel it's unfair. What about Deborah? Who was she? Where did she come from? Who were her parents and what was her childhood? We do not know. Who were her teachers, her mentors? We do not know. Did she have children? Was she married? How old was she when she acquired her talent and her divine powers? And then when she led her people, our people, to war, when did she do so? We do not know. There are many things, vital elements about her biography that remain hidden. All we know is what we learn from the text. In the book of Judges, she is called Eshet Lapidot, which would mean a woman of a place named Lapidot, or the wife of a man bearing that name. Lapid in Hebrew means a torch. In other words, it suggests fire and flame. Are we to imagine Deborah a woman with a burning inner life, a strong character, an irresistible passion? Or someone who quietly but with resolve knows how to light a fire in man and lead them to action? Yes, we do know little about her private life, but we know much more about her public activities. And to understand her better, it would be important to situate her in place and time. Joshua just died. He was 110 years old. His funeral was inexplicably, I would even say shamefully, poorly attended. The Talmud says so. He was buried in the mountains of Ephraim, on the north side of Mount Gaash. Gaash means trembling or even earthquake. Was the mountain angry? Asks the Talmud. Why was it angry? And the Talmud says, because no one came to his funeral. No one came to pay a last homage to Moses' successor, the heroic conqueror who brought them in the land of Canaan. Strange. To accompany a person to his grave is one of the 10 most important humane commandments in our tradition. And yet, Joshua's contemporaries violated or ignored it. Why? And the Talmud says, people were too busy with their daily occupations. No wonder that, let's read from the book, a new generation arose, quote, which did not know the Lord, nor what he has done for Israel. Then the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and worshipped the idol of Baal. They forsook the Lord God of their fathers, provoking his anger. Now remember, the land promised by God to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Moses to their descendants was practically in their hands. But they had no leadership. Joshua left them without appointing a successor. Every tribe had a chieftain with an authority limited only to its allotted territory. So God was neglected, history forgotten. The idols, Baal and Ashtaroth, became popular and attractive again. And so God became angry. And he delivered them into the hands of alien plunderers, says the text, who oppressed them in many ways. Some were sold as captives to their enemies, and the nation felt close to abyss. The Lord did raise up judges to rescue his people, but they wouldn't listen to them. History moved forward in circles. Sin and punishment followed one another, to such a degree that God declared, and I quote him, "I will no longer drive out any of the nations which Joshua left when he died." In other words, better do it yourself. The Hebrews were forced to fight. Was it a punishment? The text says it was also a way of teaching future generations how to wage war. Who were the nations Israel had to confront? The Philistines, the Canaanites, the Sidonites, and the Hivites. The first judge was a man named Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother. He fought and won. And there was peace in the land for 40 years. When he died, the children of Israel resumed their mischief, which strengthened the Moabites to persecute them. The next judge was Ehud, son of Gera, of the tribe of Benjamin, a man of courage and skill. He came to visit King Eglon of Moab, allegedly to offer him a tribute, but he also hid a double-edged dagger in his clothes. With clever stratagems, he managed to be alone with him and kill him. A war erupted between Moab and Israel as a result. Ehud's army won. 10,000 Moabites fell in battle. The land rested then 80 years. Shamgar, son of Anat, succeeded Ehud. His troops killed 600 Philistines. You know, the book of Judges has no poetry, but it has a lot of bloodshed. And therefore I'm a little bit skeptic about the beauty in those pages. Shamgar therefore succeeded Ehud. Again, as they did before in periods of calm, the children of Israel continued to transgress the law of God. We taught them an old, new lesson. Superficial joy brought danger, and this time by the Canaanite king Yavin, who ruled in Hatzor. Then arose the prophetess Deborah as judge over her sinful people. At this point, as we begin yet another series of our annual encounters, perhaps we ought to follow our tradition and open parentheses for some preliminary remarks. Remember, the objective of these learning sessions together remains the same. Explore the extraordinary riches of ancient texts and at times analyze their impact on contemporary issues, experiences, and decision-making. We have throughout the years explored that what excited and/or intrigued sages and disciples in Palestinian academies 2,000 years ago, at that time the term Palestine had no political connotation, remains of interest to their heirs dispersed beyond various walls and mountains. Each time a question is raised and an innovation made, it enhances the beauty of the theme before us. That was the case when we studied the tales of Abraham and Moses, Samson and Samuel. And that happens when we turn to Deborah, a great figure in Jewish history, a powerful, enigmatic woman who, sitting under a tree, had to make vital decisions regarding Jewish destiny. But while she is doing her work over there far away, never being too early for concerned visitors, we should do our work and open the doors for eagerly awaited latecomers. Back to the amazing book before us. Read it carefully, and you will remember that the period of the Judges was not the most luminous chapter of our people's turbulent and yet proud history. No wonder its opening verse is Vayehi bimot shvot hashoftim. It happened at the time when the judges themselves had to be judged. But as in the anecdote of the two brothers, the people were worse. They were Jewish and faithful only when things were going badly. When facing an enemy who seemed invincible, Jews were spiritually weak, forlorn, easily seduced by whatever is alien, but whatever is wrong. And only then they returned to God, because they needed His divine intervention to keep them alive, to protect its existence. But has it always been that way? Are we Jewish only when we suffer for being Jewish? When the outside pressures are gone, are Jewish identity and solidarity weakened by excessive integration or assimilation, leading sometimes even to conversion, as was the case in some Western European countries in the early 1900s? Is the French proverb correct that plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose? The more things change, the more they stay the same. Doesn't history have some imagination? Isn't it conceivable that on a certain level the Jewish people is still following Abraham to Mount Moriah, Joshua to the river Jordan, and Jeremiah to the ruins of and in Jerusalem? Will the history of Israel forever be threatened, if not by the same fiend, then at least by the same kind of enemy using a variety of methods? Where is the answer to its old and new existential questions to be found? What we know is that in the time of Deborah, these questions had acquired a sense of urgency. Well, who is she? What made her so courageous, so famous, so revered, and so worthy of God's attention? Granted, at that time, since the passing of the last titanic figure, Joshua, the people of Israel needed someone to respect and to follow. But why she? Because she was elected by God? Why was she elected? Consider the situation, historically speaking. Israel had no kings yet. The enemies had. The latest enemy was King Yavin of Hatzor. He and his top general Sisera were mighty, well-armed, and probably properly motivated for patriotic reasons. The Canaanite armies, equipped with 900 chariots of iron, seemed invincible. Yavin's oppression of Israel, which lasted 20 years, did represent an existential threat to the land and to the descendants of Jacob. The threat was also moral and spiritual. The people of Israel must have learned from experience. Whenever the enemy was in power, it was because God, the God of their ancestors, had placed him there. The text says so specifically. It was God who made the enemy strong and victorious. Because of whom? Because not of the enemy was not so good, but because the Hebrews or the Jews were so bad. And they disappointed him. And well, never disappoint God. When you do, despair is not far away. That's how we came to Deborah. But let's stop for a moment and see again almost the role women played in biblical history. Were they all dominant figures? Sure, some surely were. The most prominent one was, of course, our grandmother Eve. Adam was almost a tool in her hands. What she told him to do, he did. He wasn't hungry, so she made him eat from the forbidden fruit. When they had children, it was she who named them. If he had nothing to do, then actually she had always something to do. Among the 4 matriarchs, Rebekah was the decision maker in the family. Since Jacob was her favorite, she lured her husband, her blind husband, into giving him Esau's birthright. It was she who made Jacob go to her uncle and get married. What about Rahab, the all-knowing woman in Jericho, who by profession was known? And the profession, I don't dare reveal it to you, because you know it already anyway. She imposes herself as a heroic figure. At the risk of her life, she sheltered Joshua's spies and helped him conquer the land of Canaan. According to one legend, she became his wife. What about Esther? How could we forget Mordecai's niece, who thanks to her stunning beauty and devotion saved the entire population of Persian King Ahasuerus' 127 provinces? Her lesson? There can be beauty in morality, and the other way around. What about Ruth? How can we forget this gentle and timid young woman who incarnates the very principle of loyalty? What she told her mother-in-law, Naomi, is still repeated by any woman who wishes to convert to Judaism. Wherever you go, I shall go. Wherever you shall dwell, I shall dwell. Where you die and rest, I die and rest. The Messiah, the Redeemer of Israel and the world, will be her distant offspring. Why do we know more about her than about Deborah, the prophetess, who during her life saved her people from bondage, if not annihilation? But let us beware of generalizations. Not all women in biblical history were God-fearing and good. King Ahab's wife, for instance, Queen Jezebel, Prophet Elijah's hateful enemy, was evil personified. Many innocent lives were lost under her reign. Many abominations were committed simply for her pleasure. So let us also mention that Deborah is not the only woman prophet in biblical literature. The number was 58. There was one before her, also a poetess but not a warrior. Her name, Moses' sister, remember? The children of Israel crossed the Red Sea in total safety. Led by Moses, they sang a famous song of gratitude to God. And Miriam, together with all other women, followed with a very brief song of their own. The difference between the two musical hymns, Moses said, Ashira Ladoshem, I shall sing to God. Miriam and her women friends said, Shiru Ladoshem, you sing to God. As for Deborah, her song, composed jointly with the Jewish commander-in-chief, is a song of praise devoted to Israel's military victory, obtained by a courageous and imaginative woman named Yael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, who with supreme cunning and self-confidence, without anyone's orders, helped General Barak, son of Avinoam, defeat the commander of the enemy army, Sisera. The entire story of that event is told in the book of Judges, one in prose and the second in poetry. And what follows is an amazing dialogue between a powerful soldier and an unarmed woman. The opening is abrupt. Without any political or strategic preparation, Deborah sent for Barak, son of Abinoam, from Kadesh in the tribe of Naphtali, and said to him, "Has not the Lord God of Israel commanded you to go and deploy troops at Mount Tabor, and take with you 10,000 men of the tribes of Naphtali and Zebulun?" Actually, there is no previous trace of such order in the text. Does it mean that the general has not obeyed God's commandment, and God has therefore felt it necessary to alert his prophetic female messenger to repeat it to the general, which continues? And Deborah went on. "Hasn't God told you that against you I will send Sisera, the chief of Yavin's army, with his chariots and his forces at the river Kishon, and that I will deliver him in your hands?" And finally the general Barak answers, "If you go with me, I will go with you. But if you will not go with me, I will not go either." What? Barak, son of Abinoam, the commander-in-chief, the supreme general, a weakling? A coward afraid of the challenges and perils of battlefields? Possible. In fact, he is ready to withdraw into himself and abandon Israel's history to the enemy. Why then is he ready to yield to God's design for him and his people in spite of everything? Only because Deborah will be with him? Wasn't he embarrassed to hear his own words? Is it that he admired her position of authority? Was he taken by her social status? Was he perhaps taken by her femininity? One source identifies him as her husband. And then when the husband says, "I want to go with you only," I understand, or not. But that he believes in her is clear, since he joins his destiny to hers. Now, didn't he hope to obtain some kind of glory in their common victory? And she immediately negated all such illusions. And Deborah said, "I certainly will go with you," she says to him. "Nevertheless, you do not expect any glory from our journey, for the Lord will give Sisera in the hand of a woman, not in your hands." Perhaps he thought that she referred to herself, and he accepted. And the two of them rose and went to a place called Kadesh to war. The great Louis Ginsberg quotes the following midrash: "When the people of Israel fell off from God and his laws, God sent an angel to them with the following message: Out of all the nations on earth, I chose a people for myself. And I thought, so long as the world stands, my glory will rest upon them. I sent to them Moses, my servant, to teach them goodness and righteousness. But they strayed from my ways. And now I will arouse their enemies against them, to rule over them, and they will then cry out, because we forsook the ways of our fathers, the misfortune came over us. And then I will send a woman unto them, and she will shine for them as a light for 40 years. And so, Deborah's first political and military move was wise and useful. Though she belonged to the tribe of Ephraim, she called upon a warrior from the Naphtali tribe, Barak, son of Abinoam, and appointed him commander-in-chief. Her goal was to unite the people, to rise above tribal loyalties and sensitivities. Well, what then can we say about Deborah? She had a good common sense. She had a good political notion of how to unite people. She had the quality of leadership in 3 public areas. In religious terms, she was a prophetess. In the social sphere, she served as a judge. In security matters, she had a commanding position in the battlefield. Now again about her private life, we presume that she was married, therefore, to a man called Lapidot. But we don't know anything about him or about their married life. Who was in charge of the household? Who took care of the children if they had any? What was the husband doing while she was away doing communal work? What was his trade, his livelihood? What were his moods, his ambitions, his hobbies? How did he feel being married to a public personality whom everybody looks up to? And was she attractive, seductive, feminine? We are told of her that she actually was a mother. You will hear it from the poem later on. I, she said, rose a mother in Israel. That's how she begins her song. But we don't know of how many children. Or maybe when she said a mother, she meant simply poetically. Many references to Deborah in the Midrash are praiseworthy. In one place, some sages believe that Deborah's husband, believe it or not, Lapidot, was actually an ignoramus. An ignoramus. He knew nothing about anything. And one day she told him, "Let us go together to the holy temple in Jerusalem. I shall make candles with thick wicks to bring light to good and pious people in darkness. And so you too shall earn a place in the world to come." Said God, "Since you sincerely brought light in this world, I shall increase your light, which will have the intensity of that of all the tribes of Israel." So, we do learn more about her extraordinary spiritual role in defeating Sisera's mighty armies. Not only did she transmit God's orders to Barak to go to war, she also accepted to join him at the front, something she did without asking for heavenly consent. And furthermore, she went as far as to tell Barak when to launch the first attack, which, by the way, throws a strange light on the young commanding officer. In his relationship with Deborah, he does not fare too well. Too hesitant, too recalcitrant. Can we imagine today a general who refuses to go to the front unless in the company of a woman? Now, who was Barak, the general? In some Midrashic sources, he figures among the judges, alongside with Deborah, with equal rights and functions. Like her, he was a legal authority, perhaps even a good one, but he was not a prophet. Prophecy belonged to her, just as military strategy and bravery was supposed to belong to him. In his hesitation, due to the fact that he received the direct battle orders from her and not from God, it's a question that one, of course, must explore. But on the other hand, we may phrase this question differently. Didn't God use Deborah simply because of Barak's hesitations? Had Barak accepted right away, He didn't need Deborah. But is this why he was punished? His punishment being that victory was going to be obtained not by him, but by a woman. Actually, one midrashic source is critical of Deborah. First, because she summoned Barak to come to see her instead of going to see him. After all, he was the commander-in-chief. And so precious time was wasted. When there is a crisis, every minute counts. Another hidden reproach. She sounds vain when she claims that things were going badly in the land until she, Deborah, a mother in Israel, rose to save her people. And therefore, we are told in the Midrash, actually, she was punished. Her prophetic powers were taken away from her, though temporarily. But that's the singular virtue of our sacred texts. No one is totally pure nor absolutely innocent. Even the greatest, Abraham, Moses, David, have their shortcomings, their faults. Sages also wonder, why was she chosen to deliver God's message to Barak, since Pinchas, son of Eleazar, the grandson of Aaron the high priest, was still alive? Why didn't God use him as his messenger? Both had prophetic powers. Still, says the Midrash, there was a difference between them. Pinchas's powers were hereditary. All priests, their power is hereditary. Whereas Deborah's were her own, meaning they were given to her thanks to her own virtues. Commented the Midrash Tanada by Eliyahu, God said, "Heaven and earth are my witnesses. Whether Gentile or Jew, man or woman, slave or servant, the Holy Spirit rests on him or her according only to their good deeds." So now let's turn our attention to another important protagonist in the story, the principal enemy, Sisera. Who is he? In the biblical text, he is a famous Canaanite warrior whose 900 iron chariots and numerous soldiers threw fear and terror into the hearts of adversaries. As usual, the Midrash, with its occasional taste for exaggeration, goes much farther, using imagination and color to depict Sisera's appearance and behavior. Listen to the portrait of the Canaanite Superman, as it is to be found in the Midrash Abu Gurion and Yalkut Shimoni. Quote, "There was no hero like him. He had 40,000 army chiefs under his command, and each of them had 100,000 men at his disposal. He was 30 when he conquered the entire world with his physical strength. With him around, no city was safe. His voice alone made its walls collapse. It paralyzed beasts in the field. When he went to war, he rode in a wagon drawn by 900 horses. He cut his iron-clad enemies into pieces like wool. More, listen, the proportions of his body were vast beyond description. If he took a bath in the river and dived beneath the surface, enough fish were caught in his beard to feed a multitude of people. Furthermore, during the 20 years of his brutal domination over Israel, he was not satisfied with physical oppression alone. He ridiculed and humiliated the people, inflicting on them ever more mental and psychological suffering, says the Midrash. It is because of this added cruelty that he was punished. His punishment, quote, the text says, he was punished that in the end he perished in the hand of a woman. The disturbing impression one gets from these words is that they imply a distinct measure of disdain towards Sisera. Not was he to be slain, but in addition to his tragic fate, he will be killed by a woman. In other words, to suffer defeat is bad. To suffer defeat by a woman is much worse. Several Midrashic texts use this tale. Do not be shocked. To stress, why not say it in those times, to stress the woman's inferiority in certain areas. Rabbi Berachia uttered 4 sentences, 3 about men and 1 about women. Woe to the living man who needs a dead for help. Woe to the strong who need the weak. Woe to the clever person who needs a blind man. And woe to a generation whose leader is a woman. Wow. In another source, the phrase Vehi shofetet et Israel be'et hahi, and she judged Israel at that time, means in reality that the times were almost unworthy of male leadership. So some of you, I'm sure, many of you here may feel hurt or insulted by this seemingly Talmudic anti-feminine insensitivity, which may be termed as gender discrimination. Those of you familiar with Jewish prayers must have wondered whether we men are not really kind and fair to women when we say every morning, Baruch Shelo Asani Isha, blessed be thou for not having made me a woman. One explanation I received from a Jerusalem rabbi, a friend of this strange prayer, sounded reasonable to me. He said it has to do with childbirth. Women thank God that we do not have the pain women have when they give birth to children. Makes sense. One day, I hope, we may devote our entire session to the place of women in Judaism. For the moment, let me just say that it is more respectful than it may seem at first sight. And let me give you an example. Why is the Jewishness of the Jew determined by his or her mother alone? It's not from the Bible. It's only from the Talmud's time. Because in those times of anguish and persecution under the Roman occupation of Judea, some women, probably more than some, were raped by Roman soldiers and became pregnant. So our sages decided, why inflict upon them an additional plight and shame of thinking, of knowing they were carrying an enemy child in their womb? Let the child be Jewish, for her sake. Admitted, such sensitivity is gratifying. And now let's return to the story of Deborah and Sisera. The Canaanite lost, the Jews won. But whose victory was it? Deborah's? No. Barak's? No. It was due to another woman whom Deborah made famous. Who is that strange and until then unknown woman? Was she a soldier? No. She was just a simple housewife. How did she win the war? Wait, be patient. Actually, she entered the stage after the battle was already over. Who is to be thanked for Israel's victory? Barak and his troops? Did they fight valiantly with renewed vigor? Let us read the biblical narrative, and I quote. Sisera the general mobilized all his people from Charoshet Hagoyim to the river Kishon. Then Deborah said to Barak, get up. This is the day in which God had delivered Sisera into your hand. Has not gone out before you? So Barak went down from Mount Tabor with 10,000 men following him. And God routed Sisera and all his chariots and all his troops with the edge of the sword. Not a man was left. What? Not Barak, son of Abinoam, but God himself inflicted bloody defeat unto the enemy forces? It was God's intervention and not Jewish heroism that brought fear and death among Sisera's troops. It came only when the entire people joined in a public 7-day fast and repentance. That's when victory came. God forgave and acted. Is it that in the life of the individuals as well as in the history of people? God's will is manifested through human endeavor, which may be one of frailty. Suddenly the plot changes direction and characters. Let us return to the text. The text says, but at the end, Sisera had fled the battlefield on foot and reached the tent of Yael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. Hey, where are we now? The war is over. Gone the Canaanites. Israel can breathe easier. God made peace with his people. Deborah is happy, as Barak must be proud. Sisera is not among the casualties, so what? Alone and solitary, he is no threat to anyone. So the story could end right here, but it doesn't. It continues in two places, in prose and in Deborah's poem. And it reads like a classical movie with at the center not James Bond, but listen. I read from the quote. And Yael went out to meet Sisera and said to him, turn aside, my lord, turn aside to me, do not fear. And when he turned aside into her tent, she covered him with a blanket. Then he said to her, please give me a little water to drink, I am thirsty. Of course, question. She went out to meet him. Has he met her before? Has she known him? Who told her to go out and meet him? Was it part of Deborah's or Barak's strategic plan? One Midrashic source says that she was unusually beautiful, whose voice, quote, was the most seductive a woman ever possessed. Quote, she, Yael, opened a jug of milk, not water, but milk, gave him to drink, and covered him. And he said to her, stand at the door of the tent, and if any man comes and inquired of you and asks, is there a man here? You shall say no. Rashi, the great commentator, wonders, why did she give him milk? And answers, because milk has a soporific effect on the body. It helps put him to sleep. Quote, then Yael, Heber's wife, took a peg and took a hammer in her hand. It's hard to read because it's so cruel. And came softly near him and drove the peg into his temple. And it went down into the ground, for he was fast asleep and tired. So he died. And then, says the text, as Barak pursued Sisera, Yael came out to greet him and said to him, come, I will show you the man you seek. And when he went inside the tent, there lay Sisera dead with a peg in his temple. Thus on that day, God subdued Yavin, king of Canaan, in the presence of the children of Israel. Now what does it all mean? Yael was the heroine. Yael was the victor. Yael was the repository of feminine glory, but also, why not say, of duplicity. This chapter in the book contains surprising elements. Canaan was no longer a real threat to Israel since her entire army was annihilated. Why did his chief warrior have to die? He was not, as Agag will be under King Saul of the Amalekite tribe. Why couldn't he be spared, even imprisoned or exiled? Furthermore, who was Yael? All of a sudden she appears in the text. who was her commanding officer, who trained her, who gave her orders. Concerning the war itself, the text attributes its outcome to divine intervention, naturally. It is God who helped Barak and his forces to defeat the Canaanites. It was God who subdued King Yavin of Canaan. But was God also in Yael's stand, helping her murder so cruelly, brutally, inhumanly Sisera? Is God the eternal matchmaker, the one who arranged their encounter? I admit that this part of the tale perturbs me. Of all places to hide, why did Sisera come particularly to Yael's stand? Actually, the biblical text offers an immediate explanation. For there was a peace treaty between the Canaanite king Yavin and the house of Heber the Kenite. Really? Is that a valid explanation? Wait a second. Does it mean that Heber the Kenite was not Jewish? Was Yael the righteous, so celebrated by Deborah, as we shall see later, married to a pagan? Naturally, it was also possible that Heber was Jewish, the husband too. But then how could he and his family live in peace with the Canaanite occupation regime? I admit again I am puzzled by this episode. Luckily I am not the only one. Midrashi commentators and theirs seem to have shared my puzzlement. The great Don Yitzchak Abarbanel, one of my favorite medieval philosophers and commentators, asks himself about the real nature of the relationship between the king of Chatzor and the Kenite family. It must have been close, otherwise Sisera would not have turned to it for shelter. But if that was the case, if Sisera came to the Kenite tent because he trusted the family of Heber, is it humanly conceivable that Yael violated that trust and killed him? One theory indicated by Abarbanel based on a midrashic hypothesis is that the covenant between the two communities signed by men applied to man only. In other words, Yael did not feel obligated to fully respect its terms. Another theory identifies her with Jethro, Moses' father-in-law. He too was a Kenite who joined the people of Israel. Just as Jethro was known for the warm hospitality he showed Moses, the fugitive from Pharaoh, she, Yael, welcomed Sisera, the fugitive from Barak. In other words, according to the Midrash, a divine commandment is hereditary, and Yael inherited the virtue of hospitality from Jethro. Now, is that possible? Is it possible that the story had such erotic connotations, perhaps? Believe it or not, as always in the Talmud, on this question there is no unanimity. Some sages stress the seductive aspect of the scene. Rabbi Yochanan interprets the words, "he fell between her legs," as an affirmation. On that day, says he, Sisera committed 7 sexual violations or acts of rape. One source believes that the milk she gave him to drink was a woman's. Others negate such possibilities, referring to Yael's covering Sisera with the blanket, says Rish Lakish. We studied the entire scripture and did not find a single object called smicha, which means blanket. What is smicha? A composition of 2 syllables. Smicha, my name is testimony. That wicked man did not even touch her. From the human purely viewpoint, Yael does not come off nobly in this episode. A defenseless fugitive arrives seeking shelter, compassion, and pity from someone who was supposed to be friendly, and what does he get? False charity and real brutality. Yet most sages follow Deborah's position and see in Yael a heroic figure whose sole purpose was to save her people. But why? The people were saved. Our sages go as far as ranking Yael alongside the four matriarchs, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, who like her were pious and pure in all their behavior. The biblical narrative ends with what is called the Song of Deborah, although in the text we include the name of Barak as co-author. The Talmud compares it in its grandeur and magnitude to the Song of Moses at the crossing of the Red Sea. In both cases, the fate of Israel weakened, causing God's miraculous intervention. What? Israel's fate weakened? When did it weaken? Hasn't he defeated a powerful enemy? Answers the Talmud. It weakened before the battle even began. Sisera's army with its iron chariots must have seemed invincible to the Jews, who for the last 20 years had endured pain, fear, and discouraging pessimism. To pull them out of their state of depression, God performed miracles by fighting with them, for them, just as he had done at the Red Sea. Says Rav Huna, it is written, Min hashamayim nilchamu hakochavim, the stars in heaven joined the battle. It means Sisera planned his battle plan studying the stars. So God moved them around and confused his calculations. Also, as Sisera advanced his troops to cross the river Kishon, God ordered it to become a trap, and they drowned. And Sisera fled before the victorious, repenting children of Israel. Deborah's accomplishment was thus not military but religious. She made them aware of their sins and their implacable punishment, and then they won. They won only when they repented. We are close to the conclusion of the story, so listen to Deborah's victory song. When leaders lead in Israel, when the people willingly offer themselves, bless the Lord. Hear, O kings, give ear, O princes, I, even I, will sing to the Lord. When you went out of Seir, when you marched from fields of Edom, the earth trembled, and the heavens poured, the clouds also poured water, and the mountains gushed before the Lord of Israel. Following the description of miracles, she turns to reality. When the highways were deserted and the wanderers walked along sideway, village life ceased. It ceased in Israel until I arose, I, a mother in Israel. Is she in ecstasy? Listen. Awake, awake, Deborah. Awake, sing a song. Barak, lead your captives away, O son of Avinoam. Then the survivors came down, the people against the dignitaries, and the Lord came down for me against the mighty. She describes the tribes that joined forces against the enemy and those that didn't. And then comes the magnificent, pathetic, and surprisingly vengeful denouement. She describes Sisera's downfall. Listen. At her feet he sank, he fell, he lay still. At her feet he sank, he fell. Where he sank, there he felt dead. And suddenly she changes the optical attention from Sisera to his mother. The mother of Sisera looked through the window and cried out through the lattice, Why is his chariot so long in coming? Why tatters the clatter of his chariots? Her wisest ladies answered her, or maybe she answered herself, Are they not finding and dividing the spoil? to every man a girl or two. For Sisera, plunder of dyed garments, plunder of garments embroidered and dyed, 2 pieces of dyed embroidery for the neck of the looter. Thus let all your enemies perish, O Lord, but let those who love him be like the sun when it comes out in full strength. So the land had rest for 40 years. Her last words in the Midrash is an exhortation to the people not to rely on the dead, only the living pray. Prayer alone can change events. End of the chapter. I cannot erase the image of Sisera's mother standing at the window, waiting for her dead son. Every year when I chant the Haftarah, the portion of the prophet which contains this episode, it is always Parshat Beshalach. I chant it because it's the yahrzeit for my father, Shlomo ben Eliezer Halevi. It falls the following week on the 18th day of Shvat. Yes, each time I chant the song of Deborah, and when I reached its climax with Sisera's mother's anguish, my voice is penetrated suddenly by melancholy. Why was she made to suffer? What had she done to deserve such punishment? If the son was a looter, was it her fault? And why did Deborah feel it necessary or even meaningful to tell her story? The story of a mother whose tears were waiting to be shed. Wasn't she herself a mother? Is the story on one mysterious level nothing of what in time of warfare and bloodshed, invisibly and imperceptibly always links one mother to another, one human being to all others? Was Deborah so insensitive to the suffering of a woman who was not Jewish, be she the mother of a cruel, implacable, dead enemy? And what about us, fellow learners and friends? Whom do we follow? What is our mission? If we here and elsewhere are to draw a lesson from such biblical memories of lofty dreams and fearful nightmares, tell me, what is the lesson? Thank you.